Today I'm joined by Blonde's very own jack of all trades, a maker of jewellery, furniture, speakers and just about everything in between. Campbell Hatton-Ward, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's make a ring. Cam, as we size up the rings, talk me through the origin story of your inspiration as a maker. Obviously you've done so many different things over the last few years, but take it all the way back to the beginning and talk me through how you started.
So I was never really much of a sporty kid. I was always more focused on making things and figuring stuff out in the garage. And then kind of just kept sort of pursuing that through high school and always focused on the woodworking classes and the metalworking and sort of excelled in that. Mm-hmm. And then went to university for an industrial design course.
Yeah.
And that was really fun, learned a lot, but was still very focused on the hand making aspect of it rather than the industrial side of the design.
Yeah.
So all my sort of assignments sort of pushed it a little bit further in terms of what I was making. And then I sort of discovered sand casting. So we had to do an assignment where we had to cast something, and then rather than just doing a plaster or a plastic casting, I thought I'd fire up the old furnace which I made when I was younger, and then learn how to do sand casting a little bit better. So it started off in lost foam, which I found the easiest because you can just carve out the shape in foam, bury it in a bucket of sand, and then pour molten aluminium or brass on it, and then that'll create a big sort of casting. Mm-hmm. And then sort of kept doing that and wanted to do my own sort of furniture and homeware brand for a long time, but discovered that it's very difficult to make any money in that industry. People don't really appreciate or know how much work and handmade labor goes into that, let alone the cost of hardwood and all this. But then I sort of discovered jewelry, and it was a lot easier to cast the small scale bits of silver, a lot easier to work with and handle. And then from there a lot of friends were like, oh, can I get a ring? Can I get a ring? Friends of friends. And then it sort of grew from there. And I found jewelry a really fun way of doing something that's very creative and hands-on, but you can still actually, make a living off it, and you don't need a big brand name. And it's also very fun and creative because you're not really solving a problem, you're just creating something that people want to buy purely because it's nice and it's interesting to look at, and that's it.
You're taught a very functional form of design, and personally speaking, all the stuff you make is absolutely beautiful 100% of the time. How have you taken your sort of background in a very functional learning through that degree and taken it into your own practice?
I suppose I sort of just took parts of it. Nothing too. Always tried to keep my own style and just made things based on how I knew how to make them. So that sort of influenced that in terms of my material knowledge and all that. Then sort of influenced my style quite a bit. Uni was definitely good to try and push me a little bit further in terms of why I'm designing things and why I'm making those choices. Makes me question that a little bit more, which was good, rather than just completely winging it all the time.
Yeah, and your first sort of attempt at casting one of those bigger objects, you were talking about lost foam. What did you actually make in that particular project?
The first one, it was a wall sconce, a light. So it was a lot of sort of trial and error trying to get that to cast properly because it almost looked like a shell. But then the problem with the lost foam was you can't really make that same thing again. Every single piece has to be hand carved. Yeah. So that's when I got into trying to make my own green sand and hard sand using basically a glue mixed in with sand that sets when you put carbon dioxide with it.
Yeah.
And trying to do 2-part molds, but that was also quite difficult. So I ended up going to a local foundry and got them to make me a sand mold and still do the casting myself.
So to stay with casting for a second, I know when we first met, cuttlefish casting was a really interesting element of your work and something that you really felt made you stand out and was very unique. I absolutely love the texture that it creates. Can you sort of talk me through cuttlefish casting and why that's so special to you?
Yeah, so cuttlefish casting was my first attempt when I was doing silver casting. I didn't really have the access to the sand casting, which I use now. So one of my uni lecturers suggested I use cuttlefish, and that's one of the oldest methods of casting. And it was quite easy because you could pretty much just draw and cut in a shape that you wanted to cast. So I could just draw a circle into that, piece of cuttlefish bone, put the two halves together and pour the metal straight in. And not only was it quite easy and accessible to do that as a casting method, as I kept sort of doing more and more of that, I found that I was getting some really cool textures, and every ring was very different. I sort of just kept expanding on that texture and trying to create more interesting textures from that.
Awesome. So it kind of gives you this unique element with the individual texture, but having the cuttlefish as a technique and the sort of ease of carving it out gives you some level of control over the final product as well. It kind of balances the two, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Wanted to also touch on some of the inspirations for your journey. Like, you've come so far, and we've talked about the early sort of origin story. Was there anyone along the way who you looked up to or who really inspired your practice?
Yeah, I really liked a lot of Henry Wilson's work. He's like a Sydney-based designer, and he does like a heavy focus on sand casting. He actually got all of his stuff cast at a foundry that was the same place that was near my house, which I went to. His work in brass and aluminium was really interesting.
And what particularly about Henry Wilson's stuff did you really like?
I like the sort of simplicity of the designs, but also just the material aspect of it. Like the sand casting always created a really nice texture and a nice finish, and it was very different to something that you'd get that's very mass produced.
Brilliant. So at the early stages, you're trialing a lot of stuff. You've got different projects that you're working on through your industrial design background. You've done furniture by the time I met you. You've done jewelry. You've since then also done, surfboard shaping, fit out your own vans, fit out studios and stores. But there seems to have been a sort of continual focus on jewelry through your work at Apoma. What is it about jewelry specifically that's kind of kept you coming back to that medium and that format?
I find that it's just really nice because I can always learn a new skill set. So started off with the cuttlefish, then moved to sand casting, had a heavy focus on engraving and doing a push chisel style engraving, and worked on that for a while, and then got into gem setting, so just round stones with star setting for a long time. And then as I keep sort of improving my skill set and my tools and everything, now got into a lot more different shaped gemstones, which is quite difficult to set. But I feel like I can always keep sort of expanding upon that. And there's not really you're not trying to solve a problem. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just something that's pretty and looks nice, but it's very hands-on. It's also a nice material to work with as well, compared to say surfboards, which is filling the entire workshop with foam dust and the really toxic resin. And furniture requires a really, really big workshop facility, and it's a lot more difficult to sort of break into that scene. Whereas jewelry, it's a lot more accessible to be able to do that in such a small space. But also have a lot of creative freedom with that as well.
Yeah, so I guess there's the practical side of needing a space small enough for jewelry. It's easy to get into and easier to access, but also kind of speaks to your personality and the fact that you're always chasing that next kind of avenue or thing to learn. I've watched you, as we've known each other for the last few years, do tons of different creative projects. Your latest sort of one is the speakers that you're doing through Blank Sheet Audio, and there's never something that I find you're interested in but can't make. And jewelry has kind of been this interesting avenue because it keeps giving you new levels to sort of progress. Would you think that's kind of speaks to your own personality?
Yeah, 100%. There's definitely always something else that you can sort of learn upon and improve on. But it's very fun.
So we've sort of spoken about your initial inspirations and your starting point as a maker. You've now sort of been, making things with your hand consistently for the last few years. What are some of the challenges that makers in your industry, whether it be furniture or jewelry, face today?
I think the biggest thing for me is probably the business side of it. I think there's a lot of people that are creative and they're able to, make things that are really nice, and they might be very skilled, but they don't necessarily know how to sell themselves or sell their work. There's a lot of the commerce and behind the scenes sort of things about it, which doesn't really come naturally to me the same way that figuring out how to make something would be. That's definitely been the trickiest part, is sort of selling yourself and marketing yourself in that way.
Yeah, it can be so difficult to do that and be comfortable doing that. Like you said, especially if you're just a pure creative coming from a background where you're really good at handmade stuff, but some of the technical side behind, you know, a website or a sale might be really difficult. How have you kind of approached that challenge yourself?
Just kept trying to do it, like figuring it out as I go along the way. Sort of as everything grows a bit more, you sort of just have to pick it up and try your best to keep on top of it. But it's, yeah, mostly just playing it by ear. I'm still very lazy in terms of like putting out content. Like I have a lot of amazing stuff, which I've just been sitting on for years, just because I hate posting on social media. But yeah, it's something you just have to keep trying to push for and figure out.
Awesome. And do you see yourself continuing to sort of be this all-rounder, as most people have to be early on, as the sort of, you know, social media manager, website manager, head of creative direction, but also that maker, making absolutely everything that you're selling? Or would you prefer later on the line to just be behind the scenes in the workshop and let everyone else do what you don't like doing?
Yeah, I would definitely love to get someone else on board to try and take over that, but I think it's also difficult to find someone that really aligns with your vision. When you've got your own sort of like brand and it feels like your baby, then it's hard to sort of just trust someone fully that they're going to see the exact same vision as you for posting. And even still, then it's another whole element of like, okay, now I've got to set up an employee, like all that sort of stuff, and again, it's just more admin, which I don't want to do. But
yeah, I know from your time at Blonde, you hate admin. Admin is not your strong point, and you try and run as far and as fast as away from it as you can. What has like focusing on your craft, because I think one of the strengths of you is that your product really does speak for itself. Has it been challenging as someone who really intensely focuses just on the making, just on the product, to market it or to find people who are interested in your work? Or do you find that they come to you?
I think it's slowly, gotten to that point where I'm getting more jobs that I want to do that way, just naturally. Obviously, like advertising helps when you've got your own sort of content, which you can sort of put through Instagram. But yeah.
Working on it, easy. So like, you've talked about the struggle or the difficulty in selling your work, or the transition from purely being a maker, working in your passion, working in your hobby, to selling some of your pieces for income. What was the first thing that you ever sold?
My first ever sale was a ring, very similar to this one here. So this is the first ring I ever made. And then my brother-in-law now, he saw that and then he was like, oh, I really want some. He gave me some of his like old silver and just like sort of let me melt that down and work with that. And then that was the first ever sale from there.
Beautiful. And has it been easier or more difficult from your first sale to, say, selling to people that you don't know, to strangers?
Definitely easier nowadays. I think there's, even still, like when friends ask for something, it doesn't really feel as official or transactional as if like a Shopify order comes through and then you're like, okay, cool, get this done. Whereas if a friend's just like, oh, I want this chain, it might be like 3 months before I actually get around to doing it, because then it's harder to also sort of like price it with mates rates, and like you might spend a long time on something, but you have to like, you want to give them a discount to do it cheap, but also, Yeah, and I think you've spoken about, this increasing demand for your work, and that's something I've watched on the sidelines for the last few years. How have you managed to kind of stay true to yourself, true to your values, as the demand for what you do and what you make has grown? I think nowadays I can kind of turn down more jobs that I don't want to do. When you're at the start, you really want to take on as much work as you can to try and support yourself. But then, it was good to learn and like taking on jobs which I didn't really know how to do and saying yes to them, and then sort of learning a lot through that. Whereas now if someone comes to me with like someone else's design and they say, hey, can you do this for me, or can you copy this? I'd rather just not do that and don't want to rip off someone else's work. And want to stick to my own sort of style and taste. So I guess you've become more selective as a solution to the increasing demand. Has that really kind of pushed forward your own taste and design through your work? Yeah, for sure. I've sort of dialed in a lot more now with like the textural rings and like focusing more on that sand cast texture and like the gem setting that I do there. It's sort of focused in a lot more that way. Yeah. And you're still a one-man show, and like I said, and we've been discussing, like the demand for your work has only increased and increased. And as that demand grows, I guess the temptation to kind of cut corners does as well. It seems like your solution has kind of just been
not at all cut back on the other side of, or the other work that you don't want to do, and really keep a focus on the stuff that's really true to you. How have you dealt with the sort of tension to cut corners, or have you never even felt it and always been about just focusing on your own style?
Yeah, it's not really been about cutting corners because I don't want to try and drop the quality of my rings to try and keep up, but I'd usually then reinvest into like better tools, and it's a much more fun way to be like, okay, cool, I've been using the same, crappy blowtorch for 5 years. Now I'm going to upgrade to full oxygen and like LPG setup and splash a bit of cash, and then those kind of things make your life easier, so you can sort of keep up with demand a bit better rather than cutting corners. It just makes things a bit easier, and it's a bit of retail therapy as well. So
yeah, I know your ideal weekend is not in the clothing stores but in the tool shops. What are some of the purchases you've made that have really made a difference in the last couple of years to your practice?
Definitely my micromotor. I was using the same crappy Dremel for years and years and years, and it just has no power, no like accuracy, especially if you're trying to set a gem and the little burrs just like flying all over the place. Those tolerances make it so much more difficult to work with. But I recently bought like the proper strong micromotor with the hammer handpiece, and that is what really enabled me to do those like all kinds of different shapes with my gem setting as well, rather than just being limited to a round stone or something like that.
Sweet. So you feel like the upgrades in your tool set and your toolkit have kind of kept pace with the upgrades in your own skill set as a maker?
Yeah, exactly. They sort of help to like unlock more and more skills, and yeah.
Awesome.
Great fun.
So you're sort of ever transitioning from a more amateur maker, just making purely for fun as a hobby, to someone who now sort of sustains themselves with their work, with their creative, endeavors. How has that transition from just doing something purely for fun, purely for play, to now what is your occupation almost, influenced the way you approach your work?
I'd say it's still very much the same. A lot of times I'll just like make what I want to make and then sort of go from there. I do get a lot of like inspiration from customs. If someone wants a specific thing and then they want it in my style, then it will then influence a new design, which I might put into the range. But I still try and keep it pretty much the same as when I was doing it just for fun as well.
Awesome. That's like super cool to hear that you almost haven't felt this pressure in the transition, and you've sort of continued to just focus on you and your own style and what makes you happy. Do you think that you'll be able to continue to do that later on?
100%. Yeah, I think me doing what I want to do and having that creative freedom is what makes the brand unique. If I'm just trying to copy another brand and trying to make money that way, then I feel like I'll just sort of won't be standing out as much in that sense. So
we've talked about the inspo, we've talked about some of the challenges, and now I really want to dial in and focus on the craft. You as a craftsperson, you're doing so many different projects. You make furniture, you have shaped your own surfboards, you do jewelry, you're now also doing incredible speakers. What's the common thread when it comes to your craft? What's unique or the same throughout all these different mediums that makes something you make Campbell Hatton-Ward?
I don't know if there's any one particular thing. It's more just having a crack at doing it. Like if I'm interested in something, even though it might seem a bit daunting at first when you first start researching, it's more just like giving it a go and doing something that you want to do. I think it's quite easy to sort of get a bit scared off of a project because you feel like, oh, I don't know how to do that, I'm not going to try. Whether it's the speakers or the surfboard shaping, there's always going to be some thread or like some information out there that seems quite daunting, and a lot of the people in the forums are going to tell you it needs to be done a certain way. But I think if you just give it a crack, the first few attempts might be a bit shit, but they're still going to be yours. But yeah, pretty much it.
Awesome. So some of the common threads, I guess, that I've seen is like everything's sort of got this handmade feel to it. Especially when it comes to Apoma, all of your work is sort of characterized by this rough sort of aesthetic where you can tell it's really been made by hand. Where's that character kind of emerged from, and what made you want to lean into this sort of style?
Everything I've done with the jewellery has always been sand cast, and I think that that's something that Yeah, it might not necessarily be like the best technique to cast jewelry. Like lost wax is going to be much better in terms of being able to scale it and also just the quality of the casting. Just in terms of like the detail and reproduction you can get there. But yeah, with the sand casting, it's a very strong element of my work, and so it's something I wanted to lean more into rather than like casting it in sand and then polishing it all the way back to like the shiny finish. I'd rather lean more into that sort of rougher sand cast and incorporate that as part of the design rather than trying to hide it.
Yeah, and it seems like from what you're saying, the style and the look is really important too. You talked about other solutions or other methods being more replicatable or more scalable, but you're not too fussed by the sounds of it by those kind of features. Why are you so passionate about the way things look?
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose with the jewelry too, it's quite easy to, try and design something to be very scalable and go for that bigger approach. But I think the main reason I'm making any of my stuff is just because I like making it. I don't want to start palming it off to someone else to be able to, just make the money. I really enjoy the process of making it. And I think, I want to be able to show the process of the making in the finished result.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's really inspiring to hear that you're, not at all focused on the money. You're really purely focused on the craft. I think there's fewer and fewer people like you out there. You've obviously made so many different things, and over the last few years I've known you, I've got to watch you work on so many different projects. Is there a particular one or two that you're most proud of?
The most recent speaker project has been very fun. Again, just sort of always been really interested in speakers and like loved good quality audio. And then, just sort of thought, why not build a sound system? A lot of research and trying to figure out how all these things come together. It's a pretty tricky one to sort of get into when you don't really have anyone guiding you or showing you like, okay, this is where you buy the parts, this is what this will sound like. It's like a lot of money and time researching things that you don't really know if it's going to pay off. But then, with the recent completion of them, very blown away and like very happy with how it went. It was a very fun project to do with my best friend as well. And so now we've got this really cool stack of speakers that are pretty impractical, but they're also just cool. So they're very fun.
Incredible. So, and also you're doing this project with Harry. You and him are both DJs as well. Every party we've thrown, you guys are always behind the decks. Has that played into you wanting to design and make your own speakers at all?
Yeah, 100%. I've always been the guy that rocks up to the party with the speakers and the decks and done that sort of operation. So I thought I might as well, step it up a notch. Same with the vans. I've always upgraded the sound systems in the van, like first priority, make sure it's got a big subwoofer in it and like upgrade those. And I've had quite a few sort of fun after parties in the van for a while. So I thought, why not, really step it up and have a proper sound system. And then I think it'll be really fun to start hosting events or like hiring those speakers out to other people. And then sort of, I think it's a fun industry to be a part of as well. So, yeah.
Definitely. And I think from what you're saying, or at least from the time that I've listened to these new speakers, it is really like both a beautiful sounding system, but it also looks incredibly clean. How have you balanced those two, I guess, almost competing sides of the project, getting something that functions really, really well, performs good enough to do all the sort of events that you might be thinking of in the future, but also something that looks beautiful when you see it in person?
Yeah, I think the look of the speakers was a big sort of influence. Sure, we could have just done like a black, painted, cheaper system to do. But I think if you've got a sound system that's quite like visually striking and you go to a party and they've got like a big stack of cool handmade speakers, I think that influences the way people hear them. I'm sure that if you, took a proper measurement mic to these speakers, that guarantee there's going to be like, peaks and troughs in all the little, response. But, most people are going to be sort of more blown away if they come in and see those speakers and they sound like, really powerful. It's better than trying to go for like a perfectly flat response, which is some boring looking thing that way. So
yeah, so I guess you feel that the style, the aesthetic, the vibe of the project, even when they are supposed to be heard, is really important to the overall experience of them. Would you say that follows through with the rest of the things that you've been doing or making?
Yeah, for sure. I think that sort of aesthetic and like visual approach and like making sure people look at it and think, wow, you know, that's interesting, is very important. Same with a lot of like the van fit out as well. I'm sure if you looked at it under a microscope, there's little L brackets, there's little like shortcuts that I've taken, but the fact is it's done. Like I was able to get it finished, and 99% of people are going to look at it and think, wow, that's a really cool van, rather than like focusing on, oh, there's a few screw holes here or a few things that are missing. I think a lot of people get sort of a bit too caught up on like the fine details, and it scares them off from like getting into it. But I think just have a crack, and yeah.
And we've also worked on a couple of projects together through our time at Blonde. One of the more memorable ones would have been doing the fit out for this studio, but also the studio in Melbourne, where you were designing the furniture and then making everything just about from scratch yourself. How did you approach those projects and sort of take your eye for aesthetic into a physical space?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed doing little fit outs like my workshop and the vans and things. And then when I had the opportunity to do a fit out of this sort of scale, it was like a very, very fun opportunity. The biggest sort of factor at the start of designing something like this is what's the budget, what's the time budget. I know Sydney was quite a crunch trying to get everything done so quickly. So that kind of informed the decision making of like what timber, what's available, what can I actually get to work with that's, I'm not going to have to wait 3 weeks for a shipment to come in or this and that. So that informed just all this timber being Bunnings decking wood, and then thinking, okay, how can we try and integrate that into a nicer way? So again, all like the strips and slats there, we're able to like cut them up into little pieces and then put them over all the joins, so it kind of makes it look more uniform, but also, again, it's all based on how quickly I can get it done. Melbourne was nice to be able to have a bit more time to spend on it, a bit more of a budget as well. But again, it really came down to what materials are available in this time budget. But yeah, trying to make the most of that, which is fun.
So we've spoken about your initial inspiration and the evolutions in your craft since. If you think about right now, what is the inspiration for your work at the moment?
I'm very, inspired by Seb Brown and like the Ooze and those sort of brands that are really doing nice, like high-end jewelry, but it's also not super like well finished or, really highly polished sort of stuff. I think it's quite cool to do like the difference between the really shiny, nice gemstones and then like the rough sort of, finishing and setting work. Kind of gives it much more of like a raw and like interesting look to it. So it's definitely something that inspires a lot of my work these days.
Those are definitely two brands that have really strong identities and characters to them. Is that something you aim for with your work through Apoma?
100%. Yeah, it's been difficult trying to find my lane. Like I said, I started doing a lot more like engraving and things like that, and I was like getting involved in that. But now, since sort of getting into the gemstones, it's something that I really want to keep sort of focusing on, but also trying to, find my own sort of niche or my own style, which is definitely something that takes a while to get there.
You've sort of picked out two fine jewelry brands that are, sold in some of the most well-known high street shops across the world. Is that the goal for Apoma? Do you see yourself breaking into and aiming for that sort of high-end jewelry later down the line? Or would you prefer to kind of keep it jewelry that's more accessible to tons and tons of people?
I think so. I think the goal is to try and get it a little bit more high-end in that sense. Especially, like I was saying before, I don't want to try and mass produce and try and like grow that way and sort of hand off all the production to somebody else or like move it overseas. I'd love to keep working entirely with my own hands and like making everything myself. And I think, once you sort of get a higher demand, you kind of have to try and put the prices up and aim for that higher market rather than trying to, keep it super cheap and accessible, especially when the way I make things is quite involved compared to just ordering, 50 rings to be like cast somewhere else and then just having a quick finish and sending them out.
Yeah, so I think it seems like you see yourself being continually sort of true to your like authentic values, and therefore just leaning more into your profile as an artist and raising the prices and the work to sort of reflect your journey and your experience as a maker. Do you think that's kind of how you see things going?
Yeah, I also really like that I can, like every piece is made start to finish, like in my workshop by me. So it's a lot easier for someone to like get a little customization if they want to change out a few stones or if they want to add a little engraving. It's not a big deal at all. It takes me the exact same amount of time to do that versus to try and, do an original or one of my designs. So yeah, I think I definitely want to keep focusing on like the customization of my pieces as well.
So you would have gone through a ton of different challenges throughout the course of your journey as a maker. What is the biggest lesson you've learned along the way?
Yeah, honestly, it would just be to give it a go and just teach yourself. Like, you can spend a lot of money on a full training, thing, but you can also just give it a crack. And even if it's not perfect, you really don't need someone to tell you or like hold your hand and tell you exactly how you should do everything. You'll eventually sort of develop your own way of doing it, even if it's not the right way. Yeah, give it a crack.
Give it a crack.
Yeah.
I love that. Is there anything that you're really keen to give more of a crack moving forward? You've got a ton of really cool projects going on at the moment. Is there something that your crack, so to speak, is really being channeled through at the moment?
Yeah, I'm really getting a lot more involved in like engagement rings. I think they're something that is really important and sentimental to people. And yeah, I'd love to do a lot more of those. Again, not really trying to copy your typical style of engagement ring of like the prong setting and this, or like just focusing on diamonds, but being able to use like all these different colored stones, like opening people up to the range of colors and unique stones that are out there, rather than just saying, okay, I want this basic white diamond in like a really fine prong setting. I want to be doing a lot more, of those signet style engagement rings that have a bit more customization, a bit more uniqueness to them.
Yeah, so I guess there's a challenge of blending both your own style and taste as a maker with the desires of people who want to, feel like the product or the ring or whatever you're making is really theirs. How do you sort of juggle that dynamic between your own taste and your customers?
Yeah, it is tricky, but I think you do just have to find people that are coming to you for your style rather than coming to you because can you try and copy this? If someone does come to me and then ask for your typical style engagement ring, I'll usually like refer them off to somebody else just because I'm not going to do the best job at that. It's not what I'm good at. It's not my skill set. And there's no point in me just trying to say yes to get the job. So yeah, it's honestly just trying to find the right sort of clients that are going to come to you for your work rather than, to get you to do something that you're not good at.
Brilliant. So we've sort of gone through the full journey almost, from your initial inspirations, some of the challenges along the way. We've then dialed in and focused on your sort of current craft. But I'd love to sort of look forward and think about where's next for you. Where do you see Apoma or the projects or you as a maker going in the future?
I'm not too sure, honestly. I usually just play it by ear. I want to keep doing, just more and more of my own stuff and currently trying to refine my process a bit more. So at the moment, like the biggest sort of setback is trying to get gems all the time, going into the city and then going to pick up stones and they're out of stock for this stone, but I've already got an order for that. And I think there's definitely, I want to try and expand my supply chain and things like that. But yeah, I think I'm just going to keep on chipping away at it, taking it slow. Don't really have too much of a push to try and expand or anything. But yeah, would just love to keep plodding along and doing my thing.
Great. Keep plodding along, keep having a crack. Cam, we can't wait to see what you're going to do next. We'll have to follow the process along the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.